How many of you can define your superpower? Everyone has a superpower in life. And if you can't yet define it, let me ask you this. Ask yourself, what is my heartbreak? What is it that breaks my heart in this life? The answer to that question is what ignited me and continues to fuel momentum in my life. When I was 19, I was searching for something I couldn't define. The world did not make sense to me. And then I came across a book about a young Indian yogi who kept trying to elude his family to make it to the Himalayas in search of wisdom and self-realization. His parents intercepted him at every turn, but I found myself rooting for him. I rooted for this young yogi. I rooted for his freedom. I rooted for his search for meaning, and I rooted for the sheer adventure of it all. This young man eventually made it to the Himalayas, but he did not find what he was seeking until he returned home. But being 19, I tuned out the last part of the story and instead took this as permission to travel to the ends of the earth if necessary to find my answers. And I suspected I might find them among indigenous people of South America. So I made a long journey up to the northeast of Brazil. I made it to a very remote fishing village with no running water or electricity, no conveniences of any kind. And when I got there, I saw this beautiful expanse of white beach dotted with these amazing palm trees and a sweetwater river, as it's called in Portuguese, that ran parallel to the ocean. It actually divided this small village in half and also united the villagers on its banks as they did their tasks of daily living. When I got there, I had this long dark hair, as you see in the picture, but I was wearing a long white flowing dress. And the only reason that's important is that the villagers immediately saw me as Iemanjá, the goddess of the sea. Now, I knew practically nothing about her at the time, but I was immediately cast into that role. For the fishermen, the goddess of the sea ruled life and death, the bounty of their catch, and the fate of their families. She was incredibly important to everything there. And they cast me in this role of Iemanjá in the Afro-Spiritist rituals of Candomblé and Macumba. They gave me this beautiful little hut to live in on the far side of the river. It had a green flowering vine that covered the roof and these huge white flower blossoms of the maracujá plant. It looked like a little hobbit house. This is when I learned the power of story and myth to determine human perception and behavior. The children of this village taught me survival skills. They taught me to carry water on my head using the rodilha, the round cloth, to prevent spilling. They taught me how to gather shrimp in the river using a little handmade basket. And they taught me to gather cashew fruit and nuts from the jungle. And at night, they came to my little hut and they taught me their songs. And I would pick those songs out on my guitar and we would sing together every night. It makes me cry. This is how I fell in love. I fell in love with the music, I fell in love with this culture, and I fell in love with the people. The woman who lived across the path from me was Dona Cecilia. And Dona Cecilia lived in her hut with her husband and 11 children, with a 12th on the way. And tragically, Dona Cecilia died in childbirth. Dona Cecilia's death was entirely preventable, but she had no access to contraception, no access to prenatal care, and no access to a trained birth attendant. And it was then that I remembered that my own mother, who was also Brazilian, had both tuberculosis and cancer before I was 7 years old. And the difference was that we had access to treatment and my mother survived. I found my heartbreak and my passion and purpose, and I knew I'd spend the rest of my life trying to give back in some way. The Dalai Lama says that love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. How are we to treat others? There are no others. That's Ramana Maharshi. So I moved out of my hut into the mango tree, where I lived in a hammock for a year with the monkeys, And I opened a small clinic in my hut. I found a doctor in town. We opened the clinic every night at sundown. This was my first very naive attempt at providing health care to people who needed it. It was naive because it was utterly unsustainable. You might call it a failure. At the time, I didn't know about whole systems. I didn't know about the importance of structural change for sustainability. But I would go on a year later to the Andes to work with Aymara and Quechua Indian people doing grassroots healthcare. And then I went to southern Argentina, to the southern tip of the Andes Mountains, overlooking the Patagonia, to do the same. 5 years later, I came back to the States. I finished undergraduate work, I did pre-med, and then I went to graduate school, not in medicine, but in public health, to learn about providing health to entire populations. My first project out of graduate school was to return to Brazil to promote vasectomy. So contraception was perfect for me, and we needed a little male involvement in this dance. And so these are stills from a 30-second TV spot I produced with an ad agency in Sao Paulo. And you can see, for the American eye, they're very sexy. And this almost didn't happen because when I came back to Baltimore and showed the storyboard to my then boss, he told me I was crazy and he would never let me produce this thing. Until I showed him the household survey data we had collected and the focus group discussions that we had videotaped, and he backed down. And I'm glad he did, because this TV spot won 7 international advertising awards, including a Bronze Lion at the Cannes Film Festival and a gold medal in London. Yeah, thank you. It also, for public health impact, it increased vasectomies by 80% during the campaign in Sao Paulo. Well, I would go on to work in over 40 countries in the span of the next 25 years. And I also had 2 beautiful and amazing children along the way. So, Rumi says, you have to keep breaking your heart until it stays open. And that's what happened to me. Because at this point, my son was working in Spain on the island of Mallorca, and suddenly, out of the blue, he developed schizophrenia. Within 3 months, my mother, who was living in Hong Kong and had been in Moscow, she was out of the country for 11 years, was given a terminal diagnosis and given 4 months to live. I could not keep my mother alive, and I could not restore my son to sanity. It was the most powerless I've ever been in my life. But then I was introduced to an Indian woman who was a meditation teacher. You can see this still really moves me. In my first meeting with her, she helped me develop a new narrative about life and death. It helped me find meaning in what was happening. And I started meditating daily as if my life depended on it. 9 months later, my mother died at home in my arms with the most beautiful passing. And 2 years later, my son became stable and got his life back. And that is a minor miracle. So, right about that time, I was invited to move to Los Angeles. And instead of working on one little health campaign at a time and paying for production costs and airtime, I was invited to leverage an entire entertainment industry by working with the Writers Guild of America West. I got into the inspiration business as a story whisperer, you might say. And I inspired 565 health storylines on 91 TV shows across 35 networks in the span of just 3 years. And I've been doing this now for 7. So the way I did this is I set up a very provocative series of panel discussions at the Writers Guild. And I started a story tour series, taking writers and producers to South Africa and to India. And here we are in the city dump of Mumbai, where hundreds of thousands of people live. And here we are in Dharavi, in the second largest slum in the world. These experiences, immersive experiences for writers and producers, transformed them and thereby transformed their writing. I never told them what to write. I never do and never would. I trust the creative process and I uphold their creative freedom. But I create these experiences for them, and they can't not write about these things. So I've got a little more time. I'll tell you, these TV shows that the storylines appear in reach hundreds of millions of viewers around the world, especially the most vulnerable, who may not even be asking the questions. It motivates 10% of viewers of an organ transplantation storyline on the show Numbers to sign up to become organ donors. 11.9% of viewers of a BRCA breast cancer storyline to schedule screening appointments with their doctors. So, find your superpower. And if you don't know what it is, ask, what is your heartbreak? Then be of service, inspire others, and go within, meditate, and deepen your intuition. Then reimagine a society of outrageous love. Change the narrative on what's important to you. Think big, expand your vision, and remember, creativity takes courage, and everyone in this room is courageous. Thank you.